Now, I'm keen to move on to some of the criticisms of the government response to COVID-19 now as well. New supplies of personal protective equipment have arrived in the UK today after healthcare workers were told that they may have to reuse gowns because of a global shortage. Can you guarantee that those people now on the front line, risking their lives for all of us, will now have the protective equipment that they need going forward?
Yes, it's the first priority of government and of my colleague Matt Hancock and I to ensure that we protect those on the front line who are doing so much to keep the rest of us safe. It is the case that there's a consignment of personal protection equipment that's arriving from Turkey, which contains tens of thousands of gowns. It's also the case that we have a deal with China in order to bring in due course some 25 million gowns over to the United Kingdom in order to make sure that people are kept safe. Gowns are the area at the moment where there is the greatest need, but we also need to make sure that people have the appropriate face masks, which allow them to operate in these clinical settings, and also that people have the visors and the gloves and the other protective equipment that they need. And today, Lord Dayton, who was responsible for the organisational success of the Olympics in 2012, has agreed to lead the task force, which is making sure that we have all the personal protective equipment that people need in the National Health Service, in care settings, and also more broadly in the public sector.
It's interesting to hear that protective equipment is coming to the UK from China, because according to a report in the Sunday Times, the opposite thing happened a couple of months ago. It's a pretty damning investigation by the paper saying that the government lost 5 weeks in the fight against coronavirus by missing those early warning signs. And despite low levels of protective equipment in the UK, by late February, the UK had sent 266,000 pieces of protective equipment to China. Is that correct?
Well, there are one or two aspects of the Sunday Times report that are slightly off-beam, but the most important thing to stress is that the fight against the coronavirus is an international effort. So, of course, we've been cooperating with the Chinese government and with other governments, but one of the things that we have done is to make sure in advance of this
So what is incorrect in the Sunday Times? Apologies for interrupting, but what is incorrect?
I won't go through here a point-by-point rebuttal of all of the things in the Sunday Times story that are, a little bit off-beam, but that will be done later. But the most important thing to bear in mind is that the personal protection equipment stocks in this country were built up in anticipation of a flu pandemic. They were supplemented as a result of our planning for a no-deal Brexit. And it's also the case that we've been collaborating with other countries, including China, not just on making sure that we can have the personal protective equipment that people need, but also that we have the ventilator capacity that people need. And we're also collaborating, as the Business Secretary pointed out on Friday, in a worldwide effort to try to secure a vaccine for this virus.
OK, it was a really, really simple question. Is it correct that by late February, the UK sent 266,000 pieces of protective equipment to China?
I won't get into a detailed to and fro on the Sunday Times story. More details will be
Why not? It's a really simple question.
Shared with people later. Yes.
Why
but I'm
not?
not going to get into it now. I explained that we're going to ensure that an appropriate response to the Sunday Times story is issued later.
OK, so people don't deserve to know whether or not we did send hundreds of thousands of pieces of protective equipment to China in February?
I think it's important that we share facts in a transparent way, and those facts will be shared later today.
The British Healthcare Trades Association, which represents 500 companies, claims in the Sunday Times it was ready to supply protective equipment for 2 months, but its offer to help the NHS wasn't accepted until April the 1st. Is that correct?
Well, there have been a number of organisations that have sought to provide us with personal protective equipment, and we're grateful to all of them. There has been a united national effort in order to make sure that personal protective equipment has both been procured from abroad and also manufactured at home. But again, I'm not going to go through each individual application from each individual organisation, because there are details behind the processing of each application that are sensitive to each firm and to each country.
OK, let's move on to testing, see if we can get any answers when it comes to testing as well.